Hi everyone, I'm Rochelle and I'll be going over Module 3, Verbal Communication, specifically culture and language. In the textbook, the power of language can be defined by these four components. Language expresses our identities, which varies on the origin of the label, meaning whether it was self-chosen or imposed by others, and the context. Language also affects credibility by the words we use and how we communicate ourselves, which affects how others perceive us as credible or not. It's also a means of control by how we use language to reward or punish. And lastly, language is performative because it commits the speaker to a certain course of action. So, overall, or in other words, language influences our self concept, how we see ourselves based on the language others use to describe us, and how we label ourselves. And it also influences how others perceive us by how we communicate and how we professionally or socially project ourselves as someone credible or not. Language also influences the intentions of the messages we are trying to convey, even if it's not directly stated. And lastly, language influences the action we invoke, not only as the speaker, but also to the audience. Language invokes change, to like start change. So the example I'm using is from a journal talking about how after Hurricane Katrina, journalists were using the word refugee to describe the survivors of Hurricane Katrina. So basically, in this little portion, it's talking about how the survivors were very upset that journalists were basically imposing this new identity of refugee on them because they are Americans, and usually when people think of refugee, they think of people in a different country who are seeking asylum, when the whole Hurricane Katrina disaster was a completely different case because it had to do with Americans on American soil who were just suffering from a natural disaster. But by shedding this different light on their identity, it kind of um, took away their nationalistic self concept or identity, which made many people upset. This ultimately affected the credibility of many newspaper companies, such as the New York Times, because people started to realize that they were calling these people, these groups, refugees, and they were primarily less privileged or specific ethnic groups, which really made it look like the journalists were targeting them. Also, in the journal itself, it talks about how they believe that journalists may have unintentionally or intentionally used the word refugee as a means of control because the whole Hurricane Katrina situation threatened the American dream because it did not reflect strength, success, or self reliance. So, by basically polarizing that group and making it almost seem like they aren't American and aren't really even here, like it's a completely other place, that it kind of saves the American dream in a way. And ultimately, this performative act shifted the Americans' view of the refugees suffering Hurricane Katrina. While people were still devastated and heartbroken about everything that had happened, people were looking at it in a different light because of the word refugee. So, to wrap it up, basically, language is powerful because it expresses our identities, it affects our credibility, it's a means of control, and it's performative. And that is everything. Thank you for listening.